Hello, and welcome to another edition of Hypnosis Helps with me, Neil Myers, hypnosis practitioner, and my colleague, Bill Miller, fellow hypnosis practitioner. Welcome. And we are going to be talking about a topic today that there is a lot of confusion about in the hypnotic community, but it's a very important topic, and the topic is waking hypnosis. Hypnosis.
And waking suggestion we're going to talk about.
And waking
That's
suggestion.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about the differences between the two states, waking hypnosis and waking suggestion. At first, it may seem like this is a very technical topic, only of interest to hypnosis practitioners themselves. But in fact, when we describe the topic and when we describe what waking hypnosis is and what waking hypnosis and suggestion is, differentiated, you're going to discover that learning about waking hypnosis, knowing what it is, its utility, its practice is going to be valuable to you.
And the thing about it is that what most people don't realize is that we are subject to waking suggestion, waking hypnosis at so many different times during our lives and so forth.
Right.
And so it's good to know even when it's maybe happening.
Yes.
You know, because sometimes the waking hypnosis can actually do negative things, and we'll talk about that.
Yes.
Yeah.
In fact, my mentor, Stephen Parkill, used to have a saying which I didn't understand at first when he first said it, but he said that all the serious damage in the world, at least he was talking about emotionally, is done by amateur hypnotists.
Right.
And I didn't really understand at first what he meant by that, but what he meant was he meant that inadvertently parents, teachers, adults, two children, other adults, inadvertently use hypnosis. And when you understand what hypnosis is, and we're going to describe what we mean by the waking state, you'll see how sometimes very damaging and bad ideas can slip in to somebody's mind and enter the subconscious, which may have an effect for years.
Right.
And this is something that we run into constantly as hypnosis practitioners.
Right. And just one quick example before we get into the technicalities of it is when we both know that when a child is younger than 5, they're in a permanent hypnotic state.
From our model and our perspective.
From our model, and we'll talk about that, right? And so basically anything that an authority figure tells them goes deep inside. So if they're told, oh, you're no good at organization, or you're no good at math, or you're no good at you have a poor memory, and we've had an example of that.
Right.
That goes in and forms part of their core beliefs.
Right.
So that happens all the time. So this is a real important topic for everybody.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you want to go into talk about regular hypnosis.
Right. So you've heard us talk about this many times if you've watched this show before, but it always bears repetition. We use the term hypnosis to mean something very, very specific. There are many definitions of hypnosis. Some people simply say hypnosis is focused attention. Some people say it's just being open to suggestion. And whilst both of those have elements of the hypnotic state implicit in them, we prefer a more exacting definition, which, as I've mentioned before, was one first originated by the hypnosis practitioner Dave Ellman, and is still used today by the Department of Labour in its definition of hypnosis. And in hypnosis, we mean the bypass of the critical faculty and the acceptance of, or the admission of, acceptable selective thinking. So you've got those two elements. Now, the critical faculty we've described before, it's that part of the mind in which there is, between the conscious and the subconscious, it's a gateway. It either excludes information or it admits information.
Right.
And it does it really on the basis of whether the information being received agrees with or disagrees with whatever's in the subconscious mind. It's a gateway.
Exactly. So, for instance, if a very young child is told they've got a poor memory,
right,
and they're before age 5, it goes straight in. It forms their belief. I have a bad memory.
Now, again, it has to be reinforced.
Right, reinforced.
And it has to come from somebody whom that is a figure of authority. So
right.
If anybody was to tell them that, perhaps another child or just a stranger, that may not take effect.
Right. That's very important. It has to be somebody, because that is what really makes it go in deeply.
And also the important element, and it's very important that you mention that, Bill, is that it's also what's in first. So in other words, if they initially get the idea, whatever that idea is, let's say the opposite, that they have an excellent memory, then it's not going to be easy for anybody to then tell them that the opposite is true, and vice versa.
That's the issue. And so this critical faculty forms, but we know, between the ages of about 5 and 13.
Right.
Okay, so before that, things go in very easily. In that time, things go in easier or harder depending on what's already in there and this and that in their development stage. But once that's fully formed, what it actually does then is it just says, okay, does the new information match what's in there? So if they were down in there, they're told you have a bad memory. Now information comes in. Somebody says to them, well, you've got a really good memory.
Right.
Critical faculty says, no, that's not what's down in there already, and it rejects it.
Right.
If it says, somebody said, well, you've got a very poor memory. Yeah, that matches. It opens it up and it reinforces the message that's already there.
Right.
So that's what the critical faculty does. Hypnosis allows us to bypass that.
Right.
So that those questions, that barrier is kind of set aside, and we can put new selective thinking in. We can change that message.
Right, exactly.
So that's what we do.
That's what we do.
Right.
And it's very important to understand this two-part definition, because it's going to help you understand what we mean by waking hypnosis. The two-part definition is very, very important to understand. The first part is you have the bypass of the critical faculty.
Right.
Now, one of the misunderstandings amongst a lot of hypnosis practitioners is that the bypass of the critical faculty is the hypnosis, but that's not quite accurate. The acceptance of the selective thinking, that's the hypnosis.
Right.
Right? So you need to have these two elements, and where these two elements are present, under our definition of hypnosis, you have a hypnotic state.
Right.
Bypass of the critical faculty, emission of acceptable selective thinking.
Right. So if you brought somebody into a state, used one of our procedures, our inductions, and you brought them down in, if you didn't do anything, it's not really a hypnotic state because
Correct.
you haven't then given them the suggestions.
Absolutely.
Right?
Right.
So that it's those two parts. So now go ahead and talk about.
So if we hold with that definition, most people's concept of hypnosis initially is that it has to be eyes closed. They have to be in an eyes closed state. Now, why do we even close the eyes at all for hypnosis? Because you'll notice that in that definition, two things are missing. One thing is that no mention of eye closure is there at all.
Right.
And the second thing that's not mentioned is relaxation. And yet everybody assumes that relaxation and hypnosis are synonymous. And whilst we use the terms relaxation a lot to help us induce the hypnotic state, hypnosis and relaxation, as we said many times on the show, are not the same thing.
Right.
Now, very often we use the term relaxation when doing a hypnotic induction, partly because people have so many fixed ideas about hypnosis that it's easier for us to just say relax and experience that. But we know that relaxation and hypnosis are not synonymous.
Right.
So those two things are missing. So what does that mean? That means that we can have a deep hypnotic state without relaxation, and we can have a deep hypnotic state without there being the necessity of eye closure.
Right.
The reason that we use eye closure is because it facilitates the process of deep hypnosis more easily, particularly when people are entering hypnosis for the first time, or specifically when we're looking to do particular work.
Right.
But it's not necessary.
Right, and the thing is, because it keeps them from being distracted by things outside in the environment and start kicking in their conscious mind about different things, which
Right.
will bring them up out of the hypnotic state. So
in waking hypnosis, what we have is we have that bypass of the critical faculty. We have acceptable selective thinking, but the eyes are open.
right.
And this has an enormous value in all sorts of fields.
Right.
And so we're going to describe some of those things, how that state comes about, why we use it, and why you should be interested in it too.
Right. Exactly. So you want to talk about waking suggestion at all, just to differentiate? Because
Yes.
most of our focus is going to be on the waking hypnosis.
Right. So waking suggestion is when a suggestion is given, but there is no bypass of the critical faculty. One's faculties of judgment remain, and there is not a substitution of judgment. For example, let me give two examples of that.
Yeah.
Let's say that we were to enter a store to buy something, and we see something and it appears to be a little more expensive than we would want to pay. We judge it to be too expensive, and we pass by on that transaction. Later on we go to another store and we see the same item at a price lower than we want to pay, and then we decide from the basis of our judgment that this is a good deal and we want that item, and we go and purchase it. There's been no bypass of the critical faculty. And so if the salesperson was to come up and say to us, oh, sir or man, would you like to buy this? We'd say yes.
Right.
Because we've already formed a judgment that we want to do so. And in the first case, we'd say no, we'd pass on that.
Right.
Now, let's contrast that to something that our teacher and colleague, Dave Ellman, uses. I know I've experienced this in the past, what I would call auction fever.
Right, right.
I don't know how many of you have ever been to an auction. Most of the time, the auctions that we see are ones that tend to be for large, expensive items, but one can go to auctions for all sorts of things, household effects, goods, and all sorts. And if you've ever been to an auction, one of the things that you're told to guard against is something called auction fever. And what's auction fever? Well, it's in the excitement, it seems, of the auctioneering process. Somehow we manage to persuade ourselves that something is much more valuable than it actually is.
Right, right.
If you look at a big auction, a famous auction, one of the famous auction houses, Christie's or Bonhams or one of the Phillips or whatever the others, where they're auctioning these expensive items of art, notice how they create the atmosphere. There's the experts confirming that this is a thing of real value. There's the confirmation that it's something desirable because you have people there in the room ready to bid for it. You have the whole bidding process when the auctioneer looks around the room and you don't know who might be your competition. And from a hypnotic standpoint, whilst this may seem from the standpoint of the auctioneering process to be perfectly legitimate, from our standpoint, it's really a covert attempt to bypass the critical faculty. And
Right.
it's quite successful.
Right.
Because what happens in auctions, and if you've ever been to one, is somebody will bid, $100, let's say. And you know that item is probably worth maybe 110. Because you've got some sense of it. Here your critical faculty is up and you bid 110. And then somebody immediately comes up, yes, 115 to the lady on the right. And now your critical faculty has been bypassed. And what's the substitution of judgment? The substitution of judgment is yours for the auctioneers. And so you think, well, if that's worth 115 to her, then it's got to be worth 120 to me. And
Exactly.
up your hand goes, and she bids a bit more, and you bid more, and up it goes, and it keeps on. And all of a sudden, you're bidding $150 for an item which you know very well you could probably just go out and purchase
Right.
for 110.
Right.
So what's happened?
So some people would say, well, you're just caught up in the excitement of it.
Right.
So how would you answer that question?
So from a hypnotic standpoint, the excitement is certainly there. But what's really happening is from a hypnotic standpoint, is that the critical faculty, the part that says, hey, this is only worth $110, I'm not paying any more than that, has been bypassed. And what's the judgment that's been replaced with your judgment? The auctioneer's judgment.
Yeah,
That
or
says-
the other person bidding's judgment.
Exactly.
Right.
And so you have got all the elements of hypnosis. There's been the bypass of the critical faculty and the emission of acceptable selective thinking. Now, it may look as if you're being controlled. And in a sense, it may feel as if you are. But the truth of it is that you find the whole process entertaining, and that is the excitement.
Yeah.
You're caught up in the excitement
Right.
of the process.
Right.
There's a thrill going on, so it's not just a question of rationally, coolly purchasing something. You've got the thrill of the process.
Right.
And so people who are experienced at going to auctions put an iron limit on themselves as to what they're willing to bid.
Right. You have to do that.
Absolutely.
So we kind of went into waking suggestion just for a second, and then you segued into waking hypnosis again. Let's just go back to waking suggestion for a second. Give a couple other examples, and then we'll leave that topic because it's really waking hypnosis that has the real effect a lot of times. But so some examples of waking suggestion. Somebody in a room yawns.
Yes.
Now, that's not a verbal. You just see somebody yawning, and then
Right.
this one yawns, you yawn,
Right.
and it's a suggestion. There's no bypass of the critical faculty. It's just a suggestion that
Right.
goes in, and your body responds to it.
Right.
And you're not actually thinking, I think I'll yawn now. Your subconscious responds to it, and so forth. But it's not different thinking. It's not selective thinking. The other one is actually the doctors. And this is unfortunate when they say, when they're going to give you an injection or something. Oh, this is going to hurt a bit.
Right.
It's going to pinch. Actually, maybe that is almost a waking hypnosis.
It's very close.
It's a borderline thing because actually that suggestion does go in and it actually makes it hurt worse.
It does.
What they should say is, I'm going to do something here. and I don't think this will bother you at all. And it's not that they're lying to you or trying to make you believe it, but that suggestion also will go in,
Right.
and your subconscious will go, okay, and it won't make it hurt more.
Right.
That's why their suggestions, unfortunately, they're just trying not to catch you off guard. They're told don't hit them with a needle without them knowing it's coming.
Right.
That's good, but when they put the suggestion and tell you it's going to pinch, it's going to hurt a little bit, that's not a good way of doing it. Just say, I'm going to work here a little bit.
So the perfect, one of the perfect examples of a combination of suggestion, waking hypnosis, and trance hypnosis is a stage show.
Right.
Because in a stage show, we have all the elements.
Right.
They're all there. So if you, again, perhaps unfortunately, most people's familiarity with hypnosis is the stage show. And the conceit of the stage show is that the hypnotic subjects who volunteer are under the control of the hypnotist.
Right, that's what it looks like. That's, unfortunately, the public walks away with that exact idea,
Right.
and it frightens them from trying.
Now, the hypnotic effects that you see in stage shows are themselves, they're not illusions, they're not delusions, they're real.
And there's not shills in the audience. It's not
No.
people hidden in the audience that are going to come up and actually do these
No,
things.
not for a genuine one.
Right.
Although some stage hypnosis practitioners, hypnotists have done that. But no,
Right.
for a good it's not necessary. They don't need to do that anyway.
Right.
The point of it is that the illusion that they're creating deliberately, because it's entertaining and fun, is that somebody or a group of people are being controlled by the hypnotist. That's the illusion.
Right.
That's similar to the illusion in sleight of hand or magic. When we watch a magic show, we know that if a girl is sliced in half, sawn in half on stage, we know that that's not truly happening. But we believe the illusion. We know that something is not actually disappearing. We know that a human being is not floating in the air. But we enjoy the illusion. Now, the illusion in the stage hypnosis show is the illusion that the hypnosis practitioner, the hypnotist, controls people. They don't. So that's where I have a kind of an objection to the stage show, but not the hypnotic effect.
So would you say that was waking suggestion to the audience that, I'm controlling these people?
Yes. Exactly.
Because it's not really true, but it's the suggestion given by just what he does.
Well, the suggestion starts very early on. You see people come along to a stage show, and one of the worst things that can happen to a hypnosis practitioner, to a stage hypnotist, is a surprise show. He doesn't want the audience to be surprised. He wants the people to come in knowing that they're going to come and see a stage show.
Exactly.
Why? Because he wants a suggestion there already in their minds that something different is going to happen. And it's going to be fun. And he knows that a portion of them are going to want to participate.
And the whole thing is, and we can talk about it in a second, that's where you're heading, is the fact is they advertise it too because they want people who are going to be excited and fun and will want to participate.
Correct.
They don't just want everybody coming in. If you think about it, he's actually selecting that audience by advertising.
Absolutely.
To people who know, well, I'd be willing to do that.
Right.
Not everybody, but at least a good chunk of them would be.
And even those not willing to participate are willing to observe in a somewhat supportive manner and enjoy what's happening.
Right.
So he starts off with a group of people that say, hey, it might be fun to experience hypnotic phenomena. I haven't
Right.
experienced them before. A friend of mine told me and it sounded fun, and you do crazy and silly things and you don't get hurt, and it might be fun to
Right.
be controlled because
Right.
they'll still have that notion
Right.
for a period of time. As long as everybody's having fun, it's safe. So you start off with waking suggestion. There's
Right.
the suggestion, but there's no bypass of the critical faculty at this point.
Right.
And then the hypnosis practitioner will either do one of two things. The hypnotist will either ask for volunteers straight away and do tests, or do tests and then select people who do well in those tests.
Right.
And once again, this begins the process. He wants to see how quickly the critical faculty can be bypassed and acceptable thinking can be entered. So he does a series of tests.
Right, because what he wants, just on a practical basis, he needs people that are going to go quickly into hypnotic state because everybody can go in,
Right.
but not at the same pace necessarily, not
Right.
using the same technique. So he wants people that are amenable to the technique that will go in quickly because he doesn't have 2 hours,
Absolutely.
Not that we take very long at
Right.
all either, but he wants people that easily slide in. And 20% of the population are what we call somnambulists.
Right.
They drop quickly and easily into a hypnotic state. I'm one of those. And so he's selecting those. That's what the tests are about,
right.
Trying to get those people.
So let's say he's got an audience of 200 people and he identifies 30 to 40 people in that audience who he judges are good hypnotic subjects.
Right.
Now, what happens next? Well, not all of them want to participate in a show.
Right.
But some of them will. Now he's got the stage hypnotist has got an ideal group, a group who are easily dropped into hypnotic states, who want to be there and who want to participate and understand that they're going to participate in something that's fun.
And they're going to do silly things. It could be clucking like a chicken. It could be anything like that.
Right.
But they don't mind doing that.
Absolutely. And so hypnosis practitioners, for example, stage hypnotists, will advertise their shows in different ways. Some will talk about a comedy show, so people know there's going to be a comic element.
Right.
Some people talk about mystery shows, a mystery element. Some people will do a family show, and some people do an adult show. And so when people go along, adults, to an adult show, they know that they might be asked to do risque things.
Right.
Things that they might not ordinarily do in public. And so the stage hypnotist already knows that he has the right group of people with a waking suggestion, and he's used a form of waking hypnosis.
And another point to be clear is the reason we always say, no, you're not controlled. It's basically hypnosis is always a willing state.
Right.
When we bring someone in, we ask them multiple times, are you ready to do hypnosis with me?
Right.
Right? And that's to get their conscious mind assent, yes, I'm willing to do that.
Correct.
Now, you won't see them doing that here, but by volunteering to go up there, they've inherently said, I'm willing to do this.
Yes, and
so
we call that
it's a willing state.
Absolutely, and we call that the hypnotic contract, the contract
Right.
between the hypnosis practitioner
Right.
and the participant.
So he's got that just
He's
by
got
the
all of
way
those
he
elements.
does the selection of people.
Right.
Right.
Now we move on to the next stage. What he'll do is he'll form an induction, because ironically, he probably doesn't need to do it. But why does he do it? Well, he does it because it deepens the state, certainly.
Right.
And he wants to ensure that the people who volunteer are the good hypnotic subjects that he thought that they might be.
So say, why do you say he probably doesn't need to do
Well,
it?
if he's already got bypass of the critical faculty and there's the admission of acceptable selective thinking, those people are probably at that point going to accept suggestions for almost anything. But here's the thing, they won't believe that. So what he has to do, I say he, there's lots of good lady hypnosis
Sure,
practitioners
yeah.
too. What has to be done is a formal induction, and he'll do an induction. And to vary, some hypnosis practitioners use music and lights and multiple voices, a lot of hoopla. Frankly, a lot of that is not necessary to get the hypnotic induction. If you come into our offices, we're not going to play you music
Or spin discs
or spin
with
discs at you or swing pendulums.
Right.
Nothing like that. You'll enter a deep hypnotic state quickly, rapidly, easily. We don't need the hoopla of the stage show.
That's just for entertainment for the
Yes,
audience,
absolutely,
really.
right.
Yeah. Go ahead.
But now, he's got it. We've got the trance state, and he can begin giving suggestions and testing out whether in fact he does have good hypnotic subjects. And you'll see, if you've ever witnessed a stage show, you're going to see sometimes the stage hypnotist will whisper in people's ear and they'll leave the stage. They're not responding to suggestion in the way that he wants, so they don't make for a good show. But others will. And he'll probably be left with a hard core of anywhere from 5 to 10 people. Now, here's what happens next. They open their eyes. So now we have waking hypnosis, but they're in a
Right.
deep somnambulistic state.
Right.
There has been the bypass of the critical faculty and the emission of acceptable selective thinking.
Right.
And as long as he maintains that state, and they find the suggestions ones that they like and want, merely because they're entertaining, curious, fun, pleasant,
Right.
and not in any way threatening, they'll follow those suggestions.
Right. So
And that
someone
begins the
who
show.
someone who inherently says, I'm not going to get out on any stage and cluck like a chicken.
Right.
He's not going to pick him number one.
Right.
He's going to know that by the excitement. They're going to be eyes down and this and that, because he wants somebody that's willing to do
Right.
it and thinks it's fun.
Right.
So you look at it, he's really selected these people out.
Absolutely.
And even once he's got those people that go into a state easily and will take suggestions, he tests it again up there and says, yeah, you can go back.
Right.
Right,
And
and so
even,
forth.
even
So-
then, there are limitations. For example, limitations will include things that you know in your conscious mind. Here's an example. The famous stage hypnotist in the UK, Jonathan Chase, one of the things that he does at an adult show is he has the men on stage, only the men, do a striptease. But for the sake of the audience, they only strip to their waist.
Right.
So everybody's safe. And there was a film some years ago that came out in the UK and elsewhere, and it was called The Full Monty. And so and it was about a group of men who decided to raise money by doing a calendar at the end of the year of themselves nude. They raised money for a community. It's a long story. They're just ordinary people. And so the description in the UK became, he's going to do a full Monty or she's going to do a full Monty, meaning they were going to strip their clothes. So he said to these people on stage, I want you to do a full Monty. And one person did absolutely nothing at all. Nothing. And he was confused. He didn't know why. And so he went up to that person, whispered in their ear, do you know what a full Monty is?
Right.
And the person waved their head. It turned out that this person was from South Africa,
right.
and the film hadn't been shown there or come there, so he had no idea what he was talking about. In other words, he bypassed the critical faculty. There was acceptable selective thinking, but there's nothing in the conscious mind. It couldn't respond.
It didn't know what to do.
Exactly.
Right.
So what happened next? He whispered to this man, I want you to do a striptease for your wife. Just to the waist.
Right, right.
And he said it was the best one he'd ever seen.
Yeah.
So you see, once, that conscious and subconscious is linked, once the person knew. Now, why was the man willing to do that? Because it was acceptable to him, delightful to him, it was fun for him to do, he was willing to do it.
Right. If he'd asked them, which he wouldn't, but if he'd asked them to strip completely nude,
right,
they wouldn't do it. I mean, there might be an occasional one that would.
Unless they wanted to.
Unless they wanted to, right? If you had somebody who was a stripper for work,
right,
they probably would.
Or
but
for whom they had no such inhibitions.
Right, if they had no inhibitions, they might do that. But most men are not going to do that in an audience.
Right.
Yeah, so
now we've formed the basis. So I hope from that you have a concept of at least what we're talking about, these different stages of hypnosis. When you see a stage show, the vast majority of the time, people are going to have their eyes open, not closed, doing certain things. Because, of course, the stage hypnotist doesn't want somebody on stage with their eyes closed. They might fall over, bump into each other, hurt themselves.
Right.
So now we have that state. Now let's move that into a completely different arena. So there's an example of where there's waking hypnosis. Now, how do you bring waking hypnosis into your life? Because mostly a stage show, whilst it's a lot of fun, is not very practical.
Right.
Here's some of the ways in which we use waking hypnosis and what's been achieved. So an example of waking hypnosis is you're watching one right now.
Right.
Before I do this show, I always put myself into a hypnotic state. Why do I put myself into a hypnotic state? The reason is I want the information that I'm conveying to you to come across in a clear, cohesive manner. And hopefully it does. If you'll notice on this table here, I have no notes. This studio doesn't have auto cues or readers. I'm not reading from anything. I'm just speaking to you. I'm speaking to you from that hypnotic state. But you can see I'm not like this, or I'm not appear to be dull or stupid. Words just flow.
So why do I have papers in front of me, Neil? Explain that to the audience.
I can't.
Perhaps I'm organized and I keep us on track.
Of course, the other side of the hypnotic state is that I'm lazy.
Yeah, exactly. That's more like it, because I'm the one that pulls it together.
No, it's not necessary. The presence or absence of notes is not the key factor.
No, not at all.
It's that there is bypass of the critical faculty. But I want to really emphasize that hypnotic state does not mean that one is necessarily stupefied or zombified or idiotic. Not at all. Actually, in a hypnotic state, the conscious and subconscious mind are working in harmony. And it's that harmony that I'm particularly looking for when this show is occurring. And so hopefully you don't hear from me too many ums and ahs and ohs and various interruptions of speech. So this is conducted in a hypnotic state, and the studio will tell you that what you're watching here is a live show, that there's no editing, you see it as it is. It's warts and all.
live taping, yes. It's a live taping, yeah.
So this is an example that you're watching right now of waking hypnosis. I deliberately put myself into a hypnotic state, but my eyes are open.
Yeah. The other one I like as an example that one of our colleagues who passed on now has told in the past that, and this does affect people, but they wouldn't even know it.
Yes.
Is it's a great example of waking hypnosis. There was a car dealer down south who did a commercial, TV commercial years ago, and he had tents set up down there, and they were giving out hot dogs and things like this to try to entice people to come, right? Well, he